Chris Christie says that Trump's ego
You
won't
bet.
allow him to miss the debate. Obviously, he has threatened to skip it. Do you agree with Chris Christie on that, that his ego won't allow him to miss the debate?
Well, I hope he's there. I mean, I intend to be on that debate stage in late August, and I look forward to squaring off and talking about the issue. Look, the American people are hurting right now. I mean, this economy is struggling. The world seems to be more dangerous by the day. We've got the worst crisis on our southern border in American history. Many Americans feel that their liberties and values are under constant assault, and I think carrying forward an unapologetic mainstream conservative agenda and juxtaposing that with some who want to follow the siren song of populism for the Republican Party is going to be a worthy debate, and I'm
Are you
looking
going to
forward to it.
qualify for the debate
And
stage?
I hope he's going to be there. You bet. We'll be on that debate stage.
Okay.
We're working every day to get to that threshold, 40,000. But I have to tell you, it's humbling to me. Ever since we announced how many people have been going to MikePence2024.com since that day back in June, have been even making a dollar contribution to get us on the stage, and I'm sure we're going to be there.
Okay, speaking of the investigations that are happening here, obviously those would likely come up on the debate stage as well. You testified in the January 6th investigation for more than 5 hours after a court fight. Do you think that your testimony could lead to an indictment?
Well, look, I can tell you that I had concerns about the unprecedented subpoena of a former vice president to testify about my duties under my role as
You fought
president of
that.
the Senate. We went to court on that. We won that round. Actually, for the first time in history, a federal judge recognized that some of the protections members of Congress have do extend to the vice president, and I was grateful for that. But look, there's no mystery about what I talked about, and people can draw their own conclusions. I've told the story many times on your airwaves and others, and of course, on the printed page of my autobiography. And my hope is that ultimately all these questions are resolved by the American people. That I think most Americans remember that day well. It's a day I'll never forget. Most Americans saw what happened in real time, and I have to tell you, as I traveled around Iowa all last week, we were there for 5 days on the ground. Karen and I were traveling all across western Iowa in and around Independence Day. And Caitlin, I can honestly tell you, I know it's of great interest to many of you in the media, but it's just not what people were talking to me about on the ground in Iowa, or when I've been in New Hampshire and other states around the country,
Mr. Vice President,
or even here in Indiana.
One voter actually did bring it up to you. She was of the belief that you were essentially the reason President Biden was in office. You corrected her and said you did not have the authority to overturn the election that day. You didn't have the ability not to certify Biden's win. You just said that you believe the American people will hold Trump accountable. You have said that you do ultimately believe he'll be held accountable for that day. Does that mean you say that he'll be held accountable by the voters, not by the criminal justice system here?
Well, I'm just saying that's what I would prefer in this case. But look, I respect the rule of law, Caitlin. I mean, you know where I stand on the Constitution. You know where I stand on the rule of law, and I want to let our judicial process work, and I want to be respectful of that. But at the end of the day, I trust the American people in this matter, and it would just be my hope that ultimately questions around that fateful day would go to the American people. And I got to tell you, you're right. There was one person that brought up the events of January 6th and my actions that day, but just one. We did 12 town halls in 10 counties, and I have to just tell you, I was frankly grateful that she brought it up. I think there's been some misunderstanding that persists to this day. When President Trump has continued to maintain that I had the authority to overturn the election, but I had no right to overturn the election. I know that by God's grace, we did our duty under the Constitution on January 6th. But honestly, Caitlin, it just didn't come up as we traveled around, because frankly, the failed policies of the Biden administration have weakened this country at home and abroad. The American people are desperately concerned about those issues affecting their lives.
I understand that you're saying voters didn't bring it up.
They're not really looking in the rearview mirror, and And
Mr. Vice President,
that's where I'm staying focused too.
I understand that you're saying it's not something that gets brought up a lot by Republican primary voters, but when you talk about your actions on that day, you're often praised for the actions you took that day, standing up to the pressure you were facing to take actions that you say you could not take, that everyone says you didn't have the ability to do. But do you ever wish that you had spoken up sooner, that you had come out and publicly conceded the election in the weeks before it got to the point that it got to, that you had said something before then?
Well, honestly, Caitlin, I had frankly hoped all the way up to the waning days before January 6th that President Trump would come around on this issue. I'd seen it many times. You talk about times that we disagreed when I was vice president. I'd seen the president take a hard position on an issue and then take the opposite position and then engage in a debate back and forth. And I'll never forget that Monday night right before January 6th when he stood before a crowd in Georgia at a rally, and I had been in Georgia earlier in the day rallying folks for that special Senate election. And I remember he said, Mike Pence has got to come through for us, and if he doesn't, I won't like him so much. And then he paused and said, no, one thing you know about Mike is he's always going to do the right thing. And I remember in that moment, Caitlin, thinking, maybe he's coming around and starting to see that that the people that had told him that I had some authority that the Constitution simply did not give me, nor should ever give to any one individual. The presidency belongs to the American people and the American people alone. But it was not to be, and sadly things went downhill from there. But I had hoped all along the way to persuade him of the rightness of our cause and our position. Let the process work in the Congress. Let the objections be heard. You remember, Democrats brought objections to electoral college votes in 3 of the last 4 elections that Republicans had prevailed. There's nothing wrong with that process happening, but I'd always hoped that the president would come around and recognize that we did our duty that day.
That day was much different. But don't you think it would have had an effect if you had come out in mid-December when it was very clear the electoral college had certified Biden's win, if you had come out and publicly conceded the election? Why didn't you do that?
Well, I wanted to be respectful. Remember, we had about 60 lawsuits that were working, some of which were still in the courts.
A lot of them were thrown out by then.
In the immediate days before January 6th. Well, yeah, a lot of them were not, too. That's the reality is I wanted to respect the process. I wanted to make it clear that I was going to do my job as the presiding officer over the Congress, as my 47 predecessors had done, and as vice president, serving as president of the Senate. I think we did our duty. By God's grace, we did our duty that day. And I must tell you, I was very moved by that woman who asked me at the town hall meeting about it, that she later told someone on your network that she appreciated that I was a man of faith and said she'd consider voting for me nonetheless. So, I welcome the opportunity to talk about the record that we built under the Trump-Pence years, but I also welcome the opportunity to talk to people about what I understood to be my duty, and that if I have the great privilege of being president of the United States, I'll always keep my oath to the Constitution.
Yeah, that was to my colleague Kyung Law. One last question on the classified documents case. You have often said, when asked about the indictment, that you find it troubling, but wait and let Trump go to trial and present his case. He is now asking to postpone that indefinitely until after the 2024 election. Do you think it's fair for voters to go to the ballot box and cast their votes without that case having gone to trial, as far away as that is?
Well, I was his vice president for 4 years, and I'm not anymore, Caitlin, and I'm also not his lawyer, so I can't really comment on the merits of the motion that they filed that's being discussed today. I have said,
but you can comment on whether or not it's fair
indictment.
for voters to have to make a judgment before if they have to wait and they purposefully try to delay it until after the 2024 election.
Well, look, everyone's innocent until proven guilty, and the president is entitled to his day in court. He's entitled to a full representation and to offer the motions by his counsel that he would offer. As I've said before, the allegations in that indictment are serious. I don't ever want to diminish the seriousness of handling the classified materials of this country. But at the end of the day, I want to let that process work. I'll let the president have his day in court, make his defense, and I'll trust the court and the judges to make the right call on when and where that happens.
All right, former Vice President Mike Pence, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you, Caitlin.